In just a moment, we're going to be participating in a dialogue sermon or perhaps a trialogue sermon. Phil Porter will be with Phil Hart and I as we take a look at some of the activities and actions of the church over this past year and throughout our century. I always like to say, whenever we do this kind of sermon, that it's short on preparation but high on anxiety. So pray for us as we prepare to share with you. But before we do that this morning, I would like to make just a brief comment or two about our two scripture texts. I consistently find that when following the lectionary always has something to say in the moment to the church. And this morning, of course, it has happened once again. How do we keep faith, hope, and love alive in the midst of life's challenges and changes? Isaiah has a powerful response for us. Don't you know? Isaiah asks, haven't you heard? God never gives up, doesn't tire. Although we may find ourselves wearying in our lives and lagging behind. There's a word here, I believe, for the congregation, for the community, that strength and renewal are not found in program creativity or in the activity of a congregation, but in placing the living God at the center of our abundant life and our hope. Hope for us doesn't preside in who we are so much as where we are looking and who we know is with us. And that is the abundant God who is constantly leading us and allowing us strength, courage, creativity as we move forward into the moment that is God's. There is also a witness in our second text. It is so simple we might miss it, and that is that we see in the life of Jesus a life of preaching, teaching, healing, encouraging, praying, and resting. There is the presence of God in the heart and in the midst of the life of Jesus as he followed the direction that God was opening for him forward. I believe that Jesus possessed what I like to call the God gene. Somewhere inside of him, he knew that he was God-intoxicated, spirit-oriented, and that infused his life and his ministry, allowing and encouraging him to move through life on this earth to face his death and to know that beyond those events of life, there was more life to come. I think this is our calling and our purpose. The reason we gather each week is to know that we are in and with God in this life. And as a community and a congregation, a time such as an annual meeting gives us the moment to say thank you for all that is, for all that has been, and thank you even as the future opens before us. So let us continue in this spirit, and I want to invite the Phils to come forward. And it just fell out of my mouth this morning, but I said to Phil Porter, well, maybe you could just act like Phil Donahue. And so there's another Phil spirit here among us this morning as we continue.
I think that this congregation is well aware that we're in a time of change in our society, in this church, in our denomination, in the life of Christians all over. And so I think we want to take that as kind of a context for our conversation this morning, that we recognize that this is a time and also an opportunity. If we were to follow the trends, we would perhaps just see a kind of decline in mainline churches in the UCC. But I would guess that there must be some good reasons why the UCC and other folks would choose to buck that trend. So, Phil, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you think the particular gifts are that the UCC has to offer our world at this particular time.
Well, first of all, thank you, Pat, for the invitation and the opportunity to be here.
And second of all, thank you, Phil, for being taller than me and making me feel petite this morning.
And I know you mentioned something about not preparing a lot. I have actually worked really hard and prepared my first liturgical dance to do, if we have time, which I don't think we will, so I probably won't get to that. But I do think that one of the real gifts that the UCC has is our theology. This idea that God is still speaking, that it is more than just coming here to listen to what someone has to tell you, but that it's an opportunity for us to lean forward and to hear again. And I think that, and that idea of blending our mind and listening to one another, no matter who we are, so that we might be able to discern what God is telling us. I believe that's truly a true gift to the church. I honestly believe that the United Church of Christ, if you want to talk about it in another language, is the most marketable denomination out there. When I tell people that I'm a minister, they look sad for a moment. And then I tell them about the kind of people I hang out with and the kind of things that we do. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, they end up asking me more about who we are. So as Steve Sterner, who was our executive minister of local church ministries, used to say, we are the church that the seekers are seeking. We just don't do a very good job at communicating that to them, right? So I think that's one of our true gifts.
Both of you are in positions to see not only how specific churches are changing, but how the changes that we might be experiencing are parts of larger trends. And Pat, I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about the changes that you see happening or needing to happen and how that kind of compares to other places.
I participate in a group of senior ministers on the West Coast. About 5 years ago, Jerry Stinson from the Long Beach Community Church and I got together in a phone conversation and said, you know, churches in the West are so different than other churches in the United States. There's something about the West Coast that encourages people to be of a pioneer spirit and encourages individualism in people. So for a community to gather and be strong in our West Coast culture is sometimes very unusual. And so we gathered a couple of weeks ago, and there are 12 of us in this meeting. It's an amazing time for us to tell the stories of our churches, hear what's happening in other churches, and support each other. Our consultant, the same person who's worked with us for many years, gave us a research paper that has taken place in about the last 10 years. And the title of the paper is Declining Congregations. And so here is this research that has been done saying in the last 10 years, Christian congregations have declined. The main line has been sidelined, and some people call the main line the old line. The old line has seen its day. But, the paper says, some churches experience spiritual vitality. And I would say that our congregation is a congregation that experiences spiritual vitality. The vitality of communion and community, the vitality and the gift of music, the wonderful, amazing gift of being able to make a commitment to social justice. I think of Mission One and how we have stood by the side of people during the Occupy movement. Those kinds of things have helped to make this community vital and vibrant. I think the continual use of the Bible, there's a Bible study class people can participate in. Also, the weekly practice of worship allows a community to remain vital and to see itself in community with each other as a vital part of God's creation.
Phil, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think the practices that we need to be taking on, or attachments that we need to let go of in order to move forward in exciting and new ways.
I think we need to come to a clear understanding that Christendom is over. You know, that time period when people looked at the church as a major voice in their lives sometimes, or even in society. Interestingly, I think we're transforming into what the very early church used to be. which is an interesting kind of experience for us because, the governors and the mayors and all that don't come and sit and listen to our pastors for advice and things very often sometimes. And so there is a real changing world. I think in a changing world like that, one of the best characteristics that we can take on, and that will also connect us to that world, is a spirit of what I would call spiritual curiosity. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and we're all about my size, so we ate everything. And my dad would go and buy every once in a while chocolate and kind of hand it out to us. It sort of felt like we were pets. Here's a treat for you and a treat, and we would go and eat that. But anytime he left them out, we would just eat them instantly. So my dad came up with this ingenious plan. He took this box, and on the back of the box, he wrote cat medicine and put it right in the refrigerator door. And those chocolates remained there, and every time he bought chocolate, he would put it back into the cat medicine box, and they remained there for years. I mean, that was a safe place for him to hide it. Why? Not because it wasn't available to us, but because we assumed that that had nothing to do with us. And I think in the church, we really need to take on this idea that if God is still speaking, then we should be looking in places and looking for God to speak in ways that we've not done in the past. Because it might be in that very thing that we haven't paid much attention to because it's not how we've done it or it's not very churchy or whatever. It might be in that very moment and in that very place we get the next big treat. So I think holy curiosity and that ability to say, you know what, we can try some new things. It doesn't mean we reject the old or we replace everything. It means that we are engaging on this journey and that we're going to trust that God is going to be there wherever we go.
And my answer would be, along with spiritual curiosity, the ability to be an intelligent community. I think to make those decisions along the way. Leaders talk about adaptive change. I'd like to talk about the intelligence of a community. I feel that we have made one very bold step in this past year, and that was the decision to alter in some way our physical plant so that we may make more room for others. It's going to be disruptive, I think, for a while, but at the end, out of something that is old, there will become something new. And I think our renovation of part of our building will help remind us that we are an intelligent community. We can make the decisions that need to be made in order to adapt ourselves for a new and very different future than the one, even when we built that building, that we were in the midst of those times.
And can I say, I know I'm running into my dance time, but I think one of the things we also need to be prepared for is that any change will be disruptive. So when we go seeking after those curious places, be ready for it somehow to be disruptive. But that just means you're on the journey. You're at a place where you've never been before. So I think we should anticipate that with joy and excitement and with the knowledge that God's going to be with us.
And another way of saying that is, if you want things to stay the same, they must change.
One of the powerful things I think the church has to offer is that it's a transformative institution. It changes people. And I'm just wondering if the two of you could talk a little bit about how you've been changed by your life in the church.
I started off as a Methodist. 20 years old, I started pastoring my first churches. And went for a number of years trying to follow God and also trying to understand who I was. And late in my 20s, I figured out that I was gay. And I went and told the bishop of the Methodist Church, and she said, well, Phil, that's great that you've come to terms with that. Now you need to either turn in your credentials, go on leave of absence, or go to another denomination. And her assistant said, well, I think that those United Church of Christ people take openly gay people. I said, well, how do I get a hold of them? And honestly, he took the phone book and wrote down the number and gave it to me. I called and was accepted very quickly, and then decided to go on trial in the Methodist Church. I wanted them to face me and to remove me. And so there was a trial and all that. There were about 1,000 ministers. Just a couple years after that, I got a call from the Ohio Conference asking if I would serve as their interim conference minister. I was totally shocked at that. And I went in, sat with the community and the board, and they invited me to go out while they voted. And when I walked in, they all stood for me. And my mind instantly went back to the trial in the Methodist Church when they voted me out with a standing vote. And the UCC not only brought me in, but brought me into a wonderful position by a standing vote. That, in essence, to me, is how the church has changed me. I can honestly say, if it wasn't for you all, my journey would be very, very different.
I can say the same thing from a different place and in a different way. Grew up in an evangelical home, which was deeply and profoundly loving. And I felt a spiritual call in kindergarten. My sister is here this morning. She can attest to that. Jesus was my imaginary friend. Most people have cats or dogs or horses. I chose Jesus. I knew that somewhere in my spirit and in my being I was called and wanted to give my life away and wanted to be in the church. And like you, I was shocked and amazed when someone told me that as a woman, I could never be a minister. In fact, in my congregation and in my upbringing, I could never be in leadership. That was a surprising moment. I will tell this congregation this morning, both of my parents are gone now, but when I went to seminary, my parents had to meet with the minister and had to make a decision whether or not they would disown me. They didn't, but they, in the midst of the transformation into ministry, were also transformed along the way into a brighter, wider, deeper, more loving church. They remained Dutch Calvinist until they died, but they never went back to their home church with any sense of, this is my home. The world got wider and bigger and more profound because they learned and heard about the United Church of Christ. So we're adopted son and daughter of an amazing experience.
Absolutely.
So I think on this day where we celebrate leadership, that it would be appropriate for us to celebrate these two wonderful leaders who are providing vision for a new direction and a new place for this church and for the United Church of Christ. Thank you, both of you.
And we will now do our creative dance.
That's right.
Whoops,
No, we're out of
there's no time.
Let's just hug.